On the 4th of April, 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was founded in Washington, D.C. Among its 12 founding members were former Western Allied powers such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. Italy, a former Axis power, had transformed its political system after defeat in the Second World War. The most unusual member, however, was Portugal. Unlike the others, Portugal was still ruled by an authoritarian dictator, António de Oliveira Salazar, whose Estado Novo regime had been closely aligned with corporatist and authoritarian ideas common in 1930s Europe. Yet Salazar not only survived the collapse of fascism after 1945, but remained in power for decades. How did this happen? António de Oliveira Salazar was born on the 28th of April, 1889, in the village of Vimeiro in north-central Portugal. He unusually adopted his mother's surname rather than his father's. His family came from modest rural origins, and Portugal itself was a poor and underdeveloped country. Despite having once possessed a vast overseas empire, Portugal had lost Brazil in the early 19th century and remained economically backward, dominated by subsistence agriculture and political instability. Civil wars, coups, and unrest shaped the country throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. Determined to give their son opportunities, Salazar's parents sent him to a Roman Catholic seminary in Viseu in 1900. He excelled academically, graduating top of his class in 1908. Although he briefly considered becoming a priest, he ultimately chose an academic path instead. His formative years coincided with great political upheaval, including the assassination of King Carlos I and the eventual overthrow of the Portuguese monarchy in 1910. These events strengthened Salazar's conservative instincts and his belief that liberal democracy was unsuitable for Portugal. Salazar went on to study at the University of Coimbra, where he supported himself through tutoring and became deeply involved in Catholic political circles. He argued that the Catholic Church should play a central role in maintaining order and stability in Portuguese society. By the late 1910s, he had become a respected academic economist and law professor, gaining a reputation for discipline, austerity, and intellectual rigor. The First Portuguese Republic proved deeply unstable, marked by frequent changes of government, economic crisis, and political violence. In 1926, a military coup ended the republic. Salazar was initially invited to serve as finance minister, but resigned quickly, unwilling to operate without full control over financial policy. When he returns to government in 1928 under President Oscar Carmona, he demanded sweeping authority over state finances. Through harsh austerity, tax increases, and strict budget controls, Salazar rapidly restored Portugal's financial stability, even achieving budget surpluses during the Great Depression. His success made him indispensable. In 1932, Salazar became prime minister, and in 1933 he introduced a new constitution establishing the Estado Novo, or New State. All political parties were banned, censorship was imposed, and power was concentrated in Salazar's hands. His regime was authoritarian and repressive, but it differed from Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Salazar rejected mass mobilization, racial ideology, and aggressive expansionism. Instead, he promoted corporatism, a system that sought cooperation between labor and capital under state supervision, abolished strikes, and emphasized order, tradition, and Catholic moral values. During the Second World War, Salazar pursued a careful policy of neutrality. While ideologically opposed to communism and skeptical of liberal democracy, he was equally wary of Nazi Germany. Portugal's historic alliance with Britain played a crucial role. Salazar allowed the Allies to use the strategically vital Azores Islands while maintaining limited trade with Germany. Lisbon became a major transit point for refugees fleeing occupied Europe, including thousands of Jews. This pragmatic diplomacy allowed Portugal to avoid the devastation of war while preserving its sovereignty. After 1945, many authoritarian regimes collapsed, but Salazar survived. The onset of the Cold War transformed his position internationally. Western powers now viewed him as a reliable anti-communist ally. Despite reservations about American influence and decolonization, Portugal joined NATO in 1949. Salazar reluctantly accepted Marshall Plan aid and strengthened ties with the United States while carefully guarding Portuguese independence and colonial control. Colonial policy became the greatest challenge to Salazar's rule. Unlike Britain and France, he refused to grant independence to Portugal's African territories, particularly Angola and Mozambique. From the early 1960s, Portugal became embroiled in costly colonial wars that drained the economy and isolated the regime internationally. Internal opposition grew and military discontent increased as the wars dragged on. By the late 1960s, Salazar was aging and increasingly detached from reality. In 1968, he suffered a severe accident that left him incapacitated. He was quietly replaced as prime minister by Marcelo Caetano, though Salazar himself was never clearly informed that he had lost power. He died on the 27th of July, 1970, at the age of 81. 4 years later, on the 25th of April, 1974, the Estado Novo was overthrown in the Carnation Revolution, a nearly bloodless military coup that restored democracy to Portugal and ended its colonial empire. Salazar left behind a deeply divided legacy. He brought stability after decades of chaos and kept Portugal out of world war, yet he ruled through censorship, repression, and denial of political freedom. Whether he should be remembered as a stabilizing statesman or a stubborn dictator remains a question that continues to shape Portuguese historical debate.